Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. This is the channel where I, Rebecca, your host, recap live trials. I'm currently covering the trial of Chad Daybell. He's on trial for the murder of Tylee Ryan, 17 years old, JJ Vallow, 7 years old, and Tammy Daybell, his former wife. Now, the two children were the children of his current wife, Lori Daybell, who has already been convicted of conspiracy to commit those murders and those murders. He's also on trial for the murders. In addition to the murders, conspiracy to commit those murders and fraud for related to life insurance that he collected for his wife's death. Anyhow, and if I failed to mention it, Lori has already been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole times several. He is facing the death penalty. So should the jury return a verdict of guilty, we're going to go into the death penalty phase. So this trial is not over by a long shot, and we're on today's day 20. I'm going to recap day 19. Holy moly. Yeah, I've got my gnomes on today. My gnome with his yarn wheel spinning. Anyway, we're here from the medical examiner. This is the gentleman who had the sad task of examining and doing autopsies on the body of JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan. Now, I feel bad for the jury here because, this is first thing in the morning. They just get there. Luckily, they don't show the pictures right away, but of course, they're shown autopsy photos. Anyway, so, he goes through his whole litany about, his training and experience and education and how many times have you tested, that whole thing, just to show that to the jury that he knows what he's talking about. He's a forensic pathologist. So he talked about receiving the body in the JJ's body in the body bag. He does the external examination, then he does an internal exam. He explains how he goes about doing an autopsy. So his conclusion for JJ's, this is what they do. They come to a cause of death and a manner of death. So the cause of death, which is, how did he die? Asphyxia, lack of oxygen via duct tape over his mouth and a plastic bag over his head. Now, I understand from listening to some people that were in the courtroom, which would be Lauren from Hidden True Crime and Nate from East Idaho News, that the duct tape was ear to ear over his mouth, or I don't know, this way over his mouth. Horrible. So on external examination, JJ had on red pajamas, top and bottom, disposable diaper, black socks. He had scratch-like abrasions on the left side of his neck and symmetrical bruising on his upper arms. So the examiner said that he also saw some bruising on the ankles. So I think I told you earlier in my recaps that they have a way of testing an aging bruising, but one of the things they can do in addition when they take the skin sample, they cut it down and they put it on their microscope, is they look to see if it really is bruising, because he said sometimes decomposition can look like bruising. And in fact, in the ankles, he just couldn't say with any certainty that was bruising, but definitely the upper arms bruising. So he had a hemorrhage under one of his fingernails, indicating he had trauma. And he described that as like, for example, I was closing my window a day and my finger got jammed in the window, because we have these like old rickety wood windows. My house was built in the 1950s. So I ended up with this little hemorrhage underneath my nail, which is what JJ had. So he said on internal examination, he looked at the organs, the brain, he looked at all that. He found no natural disease processes that would account for his death. Then he did toxicology. He had low levels of alcohol, GHB, caffeine, and theobromide. Now, he says a lot of those could be metabolites as a result of decomposition, and as well, including the alcohol. But he couldn't rule out the possibility that he may have had some alcohol in his system. In any case, none of this, he said, none of these substances could account for his death. It was definitely asphyxia. Then he talked about Tylee Ryan. He described the way Tylee was received. Now, at this point, if you guys want to jump off or you want to fast forward, I'm not, the jury was shown photos. The public was not shown photos. Thank God. And if I was a juror, I'd be like, mm-mm. I heard that some of the jury was crying during the viewing of these photographs. I heard that, from sources in the courtroom, again, Laura and Nate, that the judge was kind of emotional as well. But I was looking at Chad, and to me, it looked like he was looking everywhere but the monitor where the photos were, like over here, like just exactly like the rest of the 19 days. No emotion, none whatsoever that I could see. So, so at this point, I'm just going to describe. I'm not going to go into, all right, here it is. Tylee was received in multiple bags, 2 body bags and 2 paper bags. And inside the paper bags were smaller bags. So the first thing he had to do was x-ray the bags. So he said the entire process of Tylee's remains, took him the entire week. He said it was very lengthy. He had to clean the mud and dirt and other debris off of what was inside these bags. Now, the x-rays showed bones. So he had to go through each bag and clean everything. And he determined that the cause of her death was by unspecified means. And how he came to that conclusion, he said there's several different ways you can come to that conclusion, but the one he chose was that there was not enough of the body to determine how she really died. He looked at her medical records, and he said she had a history of anxiety, panic attacks, pancreatitis, probably related to antibiotics that she had been taking, and ovarian cyst. He said none of which would explain her death. So he talked about what he did find. Now, this is kind of the gory part here. He found heart, lungs, 1 kidney, fragments of the brain tissue, and fragments of the bowel. And he goes, and these were not like you would normally find inside of a dead body, intact. He says these were all charred. He found a portion of the skull and skull fragments, and then pieces of spinal column, like C1 to C7, which is your neck, and then some of the thoracic and some of the lumbar, like just the spinal column. He found the sacrum. He found hip bones. He found the sternum, which is this bone here, both clavicles, which is here, and multiple long bones, which would be arms and legs. So he actually was able to do toxicology by taking the hip bone and going down into the hip, carving down into the hip bone to get clean bone and sending that to for toxicology. He pulled out skeletal muscle, is what he said. And then he said it came back with caffeine, ibuprofen, and carbon monoxide. So, but not any of which would explain her death. So there was nothing he found that would explain her death. And he said, all of these bones and fragments and stuff that I just mentioned, he goes, they were not in good condition. They were all charred. Gory, huh? Yeah. This is where I jump off as a juror. I can't. I just can't. I wouldn't be able to look. I just would not be able to look. No. So the next person on the stand was a police officer from up in Arizona, where Chandler, Arizona, where Lori had been living with Charles Vallow. And he was asked to participate in the investigation of Charles Vallow's death. So you're like, what does this have to do with Chad? Oh, just wait. You'll see. So Charles, this guy, his duty, his assignment in this investigation, he wasn't the lead investigator. He was given an assignment. At the time, he didn't even work in the homicide division. He worked in the robbery division, but he had aspirations of joining the homicide unit and later did join the homicide unit. But they would bring him on to help with certain tasks and kind of training on how to be a homicide detective. So he comes in and his job is to do cell phone analysis. He was trained in cell phone analysis. So he explained to the jury that whole thing, cell phone pings and text messages. And he was able to get all of, he really wasn't doing pings. He was doing the cell phone data. He did search warrants for the cell phone data from Charles's phone and Alex's phone, Lori's phone, Chad's phone, everybody's phone for the day of Charles' death. So Charles' phone, and in that you can see who texted who and when and how long if it was a phone call, how long the phone call was. What you could not see in those records was what was contained in the texts. So at like 6:00 that morning, Lori and Chad are texting. Yeah, they start early. So Charles arrives at this home in Arizona. He wasn't living there. He had arrived to see JJ. He arrives at the house at 7:32 a.m. And at 7:33, Charles texts Lori. And at 7:50, Charles's phone is at the house, but leaves after that. And then for the next 46 minutes, this phone is all over town. And this guy actually did this like 90-page presentation to assist the jury on each of these phones and texts, and was able to pull security footage to back up, because all of this data, it only tells you where the phone, that one phone is communicating with the other phone, but it doesn't tell you who's got that phone. So at 7:54, Charles's phone is at the Burger King. So he goes to pull footage. Now, after the death of Charles, Lori is interviewed, and she says that the shooting occurred after he arrived at the house. So she go to all these places, and she admits that she had his phone. So did she go to all these places after the shooting? 46 minutes? Because it isn't for 46 minutes. 8:30, 8:49. 46 minutes later, 8:49, Alex calls 911 to tell them to have somebody respond to this shooting. So what's going on in these 46 minutes? So she goes to Burger King. So he goes and he pulls security footage, the officer, and you see on this footage, she's at the Burger King.
And from this video, could you tell who was in the vehicle with her?
I can tell that there's at least one other person in the vehicle. I personally can't see that person clearly enough to say who that person is.
And were you aware that Lori indicated she'd left the residence with both of her children?
That's right.
And do you recall the approximate distance from this Burger King and the residence?
So Charles's phone is at 7:54 at this Burger King. So she's got Charles's phone, and the video is just to demonstrate that she's got Charles's phone. Now, John Pryor, the defense attorney on cross, says, "Didn't you see 3 people in the vehicle?" And I can see 3 people, and he says, "I can only see 1, and I can't identify it, who that is." So pretty much we know Tylee and JJ are in the vehicle with Lori Vallow. Then at 8:08, Charles's phone is at or near the Walgreens. Then at 8:16, a different Walgreens, and Lori goes in to this Walgreens. And how do we know this? Because this detective went to Walgreens and pulled security footage, and you can see her walking in. And I was trying to see if she was barefoot, but because it's presumed that she and Tylee left the scene after the shooting, and she was barefoot. So you can see her at the register, and you can see the clerk ringing up the flip-flops and taking the tags off so she can wear them right away. And you can see the flip-flops. And then later on, the jury is shown footage from body cam where Lori, police officer body cam footage from when Lori arrives back at the scene of the shooting. She and Tylee are walking up to this officer. You see them wearing those flip-flops. So all of this just corroborates that she had Charles's phone. And all this time is passing before 911 is called for the shooting that happened probably prior to 7:50. So at 8:32, she is at JJ's school. So she goes from Burger King, from Walgreens to the school, and then she comes back to the scene. But at 8:36, 46 minutes after she leaves that house with Charles's phone, Alex calls 911. Now, the jury did not get to hear Alex's phone call to 911, nor did they get to see that body cam footage where he's sitting on the curb when they arrive, and he is, they ask him, when did this occur? And he's like, oh, a few minutes ago. Really? Okay, so one or two things is going on here. Oh, also, Alex called Lori. It was a phone call to Lori just prior to him calling 911. So either one of two things is going on here. Either Lori was not there when the shooting occurred, or she was there and then she left to run all these errands, and 46 minutes passes before 911 is called. And then the rest of that day, the officer goes through. Chad and Lori are texting the entire rest of the day. Chad, Lori, and Alex are, you see Charles's phone at Alex's residence, and then back at the other residence, where the shooting occurred, then back at Alex's residence. And then later on, when she gets back to her own residence where the shooting occurred, the police confiscate Charles's phone from her. So why would you wait 46 minutes? Yeah. So I don't know that the jury has heard the phone call that Alex made or any of that stuff. So again, what does this have to do with Chad Daybell? Because, as his attorney always likes to point out, he was not charged in this, in the conspiracy to commit the murder of Charles Vallow. Even though it's suspected he was part of the conspiracy, the police up in Chandler feel like he should be prosecuted, but the prosecutors say they don't have enough evidence against Chad Daybell to convict him. So they're not implicating him. He hasn't been charged. But it's to show, and the judge did read a limiting instruction to the jury that what they just heard was for the purposes of showing method, opportunity, motive. So what does it show? It shows that Chad was quite involved that day. There's a lot of phone calls between him and texts between him and Lori. However, there was a very good point brought out by John Pryor, the defense attorney. He said, did you look at the pattern that they had? They were having an affair, yes. Did you go back and look and see what their pattern was? Did she often call him at 6? Did they often text at 6 o'clock in the morning? Did they text all day long? He didn't look at that. So, that could have been their pattern, that they were always texting back and forth. I don't know. But here's another interesting thing. That afternoon, Lori makes a phone call to Valley of the Sun mortuary regarding Charles. Coincidentally, later that day, Chad calls the very same mortuary, Valley of the Sun mortuary, telling them his uncle died and inquiring about services. So Chad was right in the thick of it. The other person in the thick of it, there were texts and phone calls to Melanie Boudreau, Melanie Pulowski, that we heard testimony from. Yep. Anyway, huge delay in calling 911, which tells me Lori's probably going to get convicted up there in Arizona as well. So that was the testimony. There was additional testimony. So the next person on the stand was the person that does fingerprint analysis. So she had taken the black, plastic bag was turned into her, as was duct tape. Fingerprints were lifted from a bunch of different places. So they actually had compared them to several different known fingerprints, including Alex Cox. Now, how did they have Alex Cox fingerprints? He's dead. I don't know if you remember, but he served a year in jail for tasering Joe Ryan, Lori's third husband. Yeah. So they had his fingerprints on file. So they compared fingerprints that were on the black plastic that JJ was wrapped in. And two of those they were able to identify came back to one to Alex's right little finger and Alex's palm print. The other one was his palm print. So that tells us Alex was involved, but we didn't hear anything about Chad's fingerprints or Lori's fingerprints. However, this woman pointed out that there was also hair analysis done, but she doesn't do the DNA analysis. She just does the fingerprints. So we're going to hear from somebody else that's going to talk about the DNA probably today. Yeah. So that is the testimony from yesterday. And today's going to be a short day. They're going to end at 2 o'clock because, as the judge pointed out, the court's getting new carpeting. Apparently, it was kind of disruptive to the courtroom yesterday. You could hear them moving furniture and doing different things. The courthouse is getting an upgrade. So they're going to end today at 2 o'clock. So I will see you guys again tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye, everybody.